The clouds hung low over the coast as I pulled my old silver Subaru into the driveway of my daughter's new home. Salt air clung to the windshield, smudged by a half-hearted swipe of the wipers. It had been 5 months since Darian and Micah moved in. I hadn't been invited once, not for dinner, not for coffee, not even to see the place I helped them buy. Today was different. Elodie was turning 7, and I had something special for her. A handmade puppet stage carved from pine with tiny curtains I stitched from old theater scraps. I had called the night before to ask if they needed help setting up for the party. Darian paused, then said, "I suppose that's fine. Be here by 10. We've got a full schedule." I stepped out of the car with the stage carefully wrapped in a flannel blanket and balanced it with one hand while grabbing a small tin of cookies with the other. The house loomed ahead, sleek, beige, perfect. The landscaping was fresh, the grass trimmed to uniform height. A small wooden sign by the door read, "Live, Laugh, Love." It was the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a magazine untouched by life. Darian opened the door before I had a chance to knock. She wore a soft lavender blouse, and her hair was pulled into a tidy, low bun. Her makeup was light, flawless. "Oh, you're early," she said flatly. Stepping aside, "Just put it there, Mom." She pointed to a side table by the hallway, already crowded with wrapped gifts. I set the puppet stage down, gently adjusting the blanket so it wouldn't slide. "Brought cookies too," I added, holding up the tin. She took them with a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks. I'll add them to the food table." Inside the house smelled like lemon polish and eucalyptus. Every throw pillow matched. Not a fingerprint or coffee ring in sight. The walls were light gray bare, except for framed prints with scripted affirmations. Family is everything. Gratitude lives here. I stood still for a moment, absorbing it all, and felt an odd urge to apologize, just for tracking in sand on my shoes. Elodie peeked her head around the corner, curls bouncing. "Grandma," she squealed, running into my arms. She smelled like frosting and shampoo, and her arms clung to my waist. I held her tighter than I meant to. "She's been so excited all morning," Darian said from the kitchen. Her tone clipped. "She asked if you were coming like 3 times. Can you help with the balloons?" "Of course," I replied, following her through the open-concept living room, careful not to brush against anything. Micah was outside assembling a folding table, waving, when he saw me, but didn't come in. I tied pastel balloons to chairs and arranged paper plates shaped like mermaid shells. No one offered me coffee. I didn't ask. I wasn't sure if I belonged in the kitchen or on the porch, so I kept moving between both wherever there was work. When the party started, I stood in the back, while neighbors and school parents filled the room. Laughter floated around me, warm and genuine, but always an arm's length away. I caught Darian watching me, once her expression unreadable, before turning to pour juice into a plastic cup. Later, as I rinsed frosting from a serving knife, I heard footsteps behind me, then voices just beyond the kitchen door, half muffled, but unmistakable. The kitchen smelled faintly of buttercream and dish soap. I stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, rinsing icing from a tray that had once held Elodie's cupcakes. The warm water ran over my fingers, the quiet rhythm of it oddly soothing after the hum of party noise had died down. Outside, the last of the guests were saying goodbye, their voices fading into dusk. Behind me, I heard footsteps and the soft creak of the hallway door not fully closed. I didn't turn around. I thought they had gone upstairs. Instead, I stayed still, letting the sound of their voices drift through the narrow opening. "She's going to start coming around more," Darian said, her voice low but clear. "I can already tell." Micah responded with something muffled, too soft to make out. There was a pause, and then Darian sighed. "I just wish she'd send the check and stop disrupting our flow." The words landed with such sharp precision that I almost dropped the glass in my hand. My fingers clenched tighter around it. I waited for Micah to say something, anything to soften what she'd just said, but all I heard was a long silence. Then the scrape of his chair as he shifted. "She doesn't need anything," Darian continued. "She's retired. She has her little hobbies. We're the ones juggling school, mortgage, daycare, all of it. We need consistency, not these surprise visits and puppet shows." I turned off the faucet slowly. The quiet in the kitchen was suddenly deafening. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, louder than the water had been. My hands stayed submerged in the now lukewarm sink, as if frozen there, as if moving would make the moment more real. "She just wants to help," Micah mumbled. Darian gave a short, dry laugh, then let her help in a way that actually helps. Write a check. That's what she's good at. A chair creaked again, then nothing. I dried my hands on the edge of my sweater. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears sat somewhere just behind my eyes, waiting for the right crack to spill through. I stepped away from the sink quietly, careful not to make the floorboards groan. I didn't want to interrupt them. Didn't want to see their faces when they realized I'd heard. I slipped through the living room past the deflated balloons and crumpled wrapping paper, and into the guest room they'd prepared for me with perfect linen sheets and no photographs on the dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall where a framed print declared, "Gratitude is a choice." And I finally understood exactly what I had become. I woke before the sun, the house still wrapped in sleep. Elodie's crown lay on the hallway floor, crooked and glittering under the faint light from the bathroom nightlight. I picked it up and set it gently on the entry table before slipping my shoes on. The guest room was already immaculate bed, made, floor swept. There would be no need for them to enter and wonder when I'd left. No note, no drama. I didn't need to explain myself, not after hearing what I heard. The door clicked softly behind me as I stepped into the cold morning air. The drive home was quiet, the coastal road lined with pine and the silver ribbon of ocean to my left. I kept the radio off. I didn't want distraction. I wanted to feel every mile I was putting between us. Back in my small rental, I dropped my overnight bag in the corner and went straight to the kettle. The kitchen was cluttered, lived in. A quilt draped over the back of a chair, a grocery list, half scribbled on the counter. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. I exhaled. It was mine. When the tea was ready, I cradled the cup in both hands and sat at the table, the steam curling toward my face. I reached for my laptop, opened it, and logged into the bank. The numbers glowed back at me, steady, habitual, predictable. There it was. Hale Mortgage Transfer, $1.200 month. Every month like clockwork. No thank you. No update. Just an expectation silently met. My fingers hovered over the cancel recurring payment button. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the years behind this routine. I thought of Elodie's tiny arms around my waist, of Darian's tight smile, of the puppet stage I'd left now, likely boxed and forgotten in a closet. I clicked. A message popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel this payment?" I clicked again. The screen flashed green, transfer canceled successfully. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room deepened, but it wasn't heavy. It was clear. I lifted the tea to my lips, the first sip, bitter and warm, and felt something loosen in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, just a quiet knowing that I couldn't give like that anymore, not when I wasn't even seen. And for the first time in a long while, I began to wonder what it might feel like to give something back to myself. I didn't write the email right away. I sat with the decision for 2 full days. I let it steep like strong tea, letting the edges of certainty grow firm before I touched the keyboard. It was Tuesday morning. The sky outside my kitchen window was soft and overcast, the kind of light that makes everything feel quieter. I opened a blank draft and stared at it for a long while. Then I began. Darian, starting next month, I won't be contributing to the mortgage anymore. This isn't a punishment. It's not even about the money. I love you. I always will. But I also need to begin caring for my own future in the same way I've cared for yours. I hope you understand. Mom, I read it twice. I didn't edit. I didn't soften the edges or over-explain. I didn't add an apology at the end or a sentence to ease her into it. It wasn't cruel. It was clear. I hovered over the send button for just a second. Then I clicked. There was no dramatic sound, no gust of wind through the window, no shift in the air. Just the soft whoosh as the message disappeared into the inbox of the daughter, who would no doubt read it, with her lips pressed tight and her brow drawn. I closed the laptop and slid it across the table. My hands found the tea again, now lukewarm. I took a sip anyway. I didn't expect a reply, not right away, maybe not at all. But something had shifted in the space between us now, even if only I felt it. I had drawn a boundary, not out of spite, but out of recognition. I had been giving from an endless cup that had finally gone dry. And now that the flow had stopped, I was curious what would remain. The email was never answered, not with words, but something shifted. I could feel it before I even heard about it, from the silence that stretched longer than usual, from the missed calls I didn't return. A few days later, word came through a neighbor who still saw Darian at school pickups. There had been arguments, loud ones, the kind that spill out through walls and into parked cars. Inside their house, the calm I once tiptoed through had cracked. You could have told her we needed more time, Darian snapped, pacing the kitchen. This just dropped on us. Micah, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, didn't flinch. She doesn't owe us that. She always helped. Always. That was her choice, he said. You turned it into expectation. Darian bristled. We built our life with her help in mind. And maybe that was the mistake. Upstairs, Elodie sat at the top of the staircase, knees pulled to her chest, her puppet resting in her lap. The one I gave her last year still intact, though the yarn hair was unraveling. She didn't speak, just listened. Eyes wide, quiet as snowfall. I didn't need to be in the house to know what was happening. I could hear it in Micah's clipped tone, feel it in Darian's growing stillness. The next morning, an envelope arrived. No return address, just a shaky "to Grandma" in crayon. Inside was a drawing Elodie and me on stage, surrounded by stars. She'd drawn us both smiling, with a little arrow pointing to me, the real director. I held that paper like something fragile, as if too much pressure might smudge her belief in me. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like someone who had disappeared. I felt seen. The flyer had been tacked to the corkboard at the grocery store, just below a faded poster for a missing cat, and above an ad for piano lessons. Community Arts Workshop Set. Design for retirees. No experience necessary. Materials provided. I wasn't sure what pulled me to it. Maybe the word retirees, maybe the faded sketch of a stage drawn across the bottom. I tore off the contact tab before I could talk myself out of it. The workshop met on Thursdays in a bright, drafty room at the old library annex. The floors were scarred with years of paint drips, and the tables wobbled slightly under the weight of memory and forgotten tools. But the space breathed. It smelled of glue, sawdust, and possibility. I chose a spot near the window where the light pooled softly over the tabletop. Each week we worked with foam board fabric scraps, thin wooden rods, whatever was on hand. The instructor, a woman named Marlene, with a gray pixie cut and an easy laugh, let us work without pressure. She didn't care if things were straight or perfect. This isn't Broadway, she'd say. This is yours. I built a miniature stage with red velvet curtains, made from an old scarf I found in the back of my closet. I painted a tiny gold proscenium arch and carved small wooden puppets. Nothing elaborate, just the shapes of figures meant to stand for something. I lost track of time in there. One Thursday, while adjusting a spotlight no bigger than my thumb, I felt a sudden warmth press behind my ribs. Not sadness, not nostalgia, something else. Like I had picked up an old dusty part of myself I hadn't realized I'd dropped. When the class ended, I didn't rush out like the others. I lingered at the table, running my fingers along the tiny stage. It was rough in places, uneven at the seams. But it was mine. That night, back at home, I placed the little theater on the center of my kitchen table, right next to Elodie's crayon drawing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be invited into someone else's life. The text came in on a Saturday afternoon while I was stringing miniature lanterns above the puppet stage for the community center showcase. Can we talk? Just that. No greeting, no punctuation beyond the question mark. But I knew who it was. I stared at it for a few minutes before answering. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Seaside Cafe. The wind off the water was cool the next day, lifting the edges of the cafe's paper napkins and carrying the scent of espresso and sea salt. I chose a table near the window, one that faced the marina, and ordered tea without asking if she wanted anything. Darian arrived 5 minutes late. Coat, barely buttoned hair, swept up in a way that used to say effort, but today looked rushed. She sat down carefully, folding her hands in front of her. For a while, we just listened to the clink of cups and the low murmur of nearby conversations. Then she exhaled. I didn't realize, she said quietly, eyes on the table, how much you were doing. Until you stopped. I didn't speak. I let her fill the silence. I guess I thought you'd always be there. Not just for Elodie. For everything. She looked up. Finally, her expression caught somewhere between guilt and confusion. And when you weren't, I felt abandoned. And then angry that I felt that way. I stirred my tea slowly, the clink of the spoon gentle against the porcelain. You felt what you felt, I said. But love isn't a subscription service. It's not paid on the first of the month. It's not automatic. It has to be seen, Darian. It has to be acknowledged. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I know. I think I'm starting to know. I nodded. Not in agreement, but in recognition of her trying. We didn't resolve everything in that cafe. No long apologies, no dramatic hugs. Just two women related by blood, sitting across from each other, with a cautious kind of honesty neither of us had reached in years. She stood first. Thank you for meeting me, she said. Thank you for asking. And when I walked back home, I didn't feel light exactly. But I didn't feel invisible either. I didn't start sending money again. That door stayed closed, but a different one creaked open slowly, and only because I opened it with care. Elodie's teacher invited me to lead a puppet play workshop at her elementary school. When I arrived, arms full of wooden characters and fabric scraps, the kids swarmed me with the kind of wide-eyed curiosity only children can give freely. I showed them how to build simple backdrops, how to move the puppets with gentle hands, how to let their voices fill the space behind a curtain. Elodie beamed the whole time, her small hands confidently stringing a pair of cardboard wings onto a dragon puppet. She tugged my sleeve between activities and whispered, I told them you're a real theater lady. I smiled, something soft and full blooming in my chest. Near the end of the session, I spotted Darian standing in the back of the room. She hadn't told me she was coming. Her arms were crossed, not out of defiance, but from uncertainty. Her eyes followed every movement I made, watching not as a daughter expecting something, but as a woman unsure where she now belonged in this new rhythm. I didn't wave. I just kept going, helping a little boy glue down his scenery, encouraging a shy girl to speak louder when her puppet took the stage. When the final bell rang, the children filed out in pairs, still clutching their creations. Darian stayed behind for a moment, then gave me a nod that held more meaning than any sentence could have. It wasn't permission. It wasn't an apology. It was acknowledgement. Later at home, I hung Elodie's newest drawing beside the others on my fridge, this one, showing us on stage side by side under a painted sky. The email came from Marlene. The community center had partnered with a local youth theater program, and they needed someone to co-lead the set design project for their spring play. She wrote, "I thought of you immediately. Would you consider it?" I didn't hesitate. I wrote back yes before I even finished my tea. When I stepped into the backstage workshop 2 weeks later, the scent of sawdust and paint welcomed me like an old friend. The room was cluttered, the tools familiar. Teenagers buzzed around in small clusters, measuring boards, sketching stage layouts, laughing in that unguarded way only the young do. I didn't walk in expecting to prove anything. I wasn't there to be needed or thanked. I was there because I missed the feeling of rough wood under my fingers, of imagining a world and slowly building it into shape. I guided them through ideas, showed them how to hinge panels cleanly, how to use light to suggest emotion. They listened, then took those ideas and made them their own. And as I stood there, watching those sets take form from scraps and sketches, I felt something settle into place, quiet, steady mine again. For Elodie's 8th birthday, I didn't send money. I didn't ask what she needed or whether they'd already bought the cake. I just carved a small theater box from cedar sanded, it smooth, painted it soft lilac, and filled it with 5 new puppets. Each one, hand-stitched each one, with a story waiting to be told. I wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with a red ribbon, then mailed it 2 days early with no note inside, no envelope of bills, no instructions. A week later, Darian called. Her voice was softer than I remembered. She loved it, she said. She won't stop putting on shows for Micah. She made us sit through a 3-act saga about a talking goose who becomes mayor. I laughed. There was a pause. Then, "How did you make the curtains hang like that? They fall just right when she opens it." I told her about the fishing line, the way you weight the edges to make them billow gently. She asked more questions. Not out of obligation, out of interest. And when the call ended, there was no mention of support of what I could offer or send, just a quiet thanks. I slipped on my jacket and headed down to the community theater.